What is good, my dudes? It's your homie, Fracture OW. OW standing for Overwatch, which I'm sure you know because this is an Overwatch League video. Not for Overwatch League, but about Overwatch League. And welcome to my series called Toronto Defiant Fan Reaction. It's based off of, if you're from Toronto or you cheer for the Leafs, you might know who Steve Dangle is. He does Leafs fan reactions after every Leafs game. So I started doing these during the Toronto Defiant's first season in the Overwatch League. Took a break from it last year to focus on school. Right now, school's winding down, and I've decided to take a break from doing homework to talk about the Toronto Defiant because, let's face it, they had a great fucking weekend. So, to start things off, Toronto Defiant win over both the Vancouver Titans and the Atlanta Reign this weekend on opening weekend of the Overwatch League. So Toronto Defiant beat the Vancouver Titans 3-1, taking the first map of the series on Nepal 2-1, taking the second map of the series on Eichenwald 3-2, and unfortunately they did drop Gibraltar to the Titans in a 2-1 fashion, and then they just came back on Hanamura and took that 2-1. Their match against the Vancouver Titans really was more of a warm-up game for them, as you saw when the big improvement from the Vancouver game to the Atlanta Reign game. I mean, maybe it wasn't a big improvement, but they definitely looked a lot more coordinated, and they seemed to have a lot more of the kinks worked out versus the Reign. Whereas versus the Titans, it kind of seemed like they were still trying to work and figure things out. So coming out of this offseason, I don't think there was any fan or any person in the league who didn't have questions about some part of the Toronto Defiance roster. Because you could have picked literally anything from their roster and said, I don't know about this. You could have said, oh, I don't know, is Sato gonna look as good on Toronto as he did on Philly? How is Michelle gonna look? We haven't seen Michelle in literally a whole season. He was benched for Marvel on the Sigma the entirety of last year on Soul Dynasty. And then you could go over to the DPS and you could say, Nice has kind of fallen off since being on Fusion University. Is he going to step back up and pop back off now that he's in the league? Does he have more motivation? Was another question. You could also ask and wonder, who's going to be starting DPS or starting hit scan? Is it going to be Hisu or is it going to be Logix? And then you would go to the back line and you would say, you've got Aztac, Onsunjay, and Lastro. Aztac was known as the second best flex support coming out of Contenders Korea this offseason. But are we going to see him or are we going to see Lastro? And then Onsunjay, I personally couldn't find anything on Onsunjay. Diamond had questions about Onsunjay as well. It was kind of difficult for us to find anything on him. And then we went into this opening day of matches, and Toronto looked like they still had things to work out. Diamond's big criticism of Michelle was Michelle didn't always make the right decision whether to peel for Sato or go on the DPS. Nice this weekend also had some questionable duplicates on the Echo, and Sato kept dying when it kind of looked like he shouldn't have. There were quite a few questions, especially on Eichenwald when it took Toronto multiple tries to get a pick on Shredlock after they walled him off at the choke. When Vancouver walled off Sato, they were able to get him like that. I would chalk it mostly up to synergy. I don't think the team has fully gotten used to playing with each other, given that in the starting roster only two people have played with each other before, and that's Hisu and Sato. And then notes on Gibraltar. Gibraltar, they did finally bring in Beast and Logix, mostly because Toronto, like every Toronto fan knew, even I'm sure the Titans fans knew, Toronto was probably going to win. Toronto was always going to win. Toronto, on paper, is better than Vancouver, and that showed up here. The coaching was better. Our players were better. I'm sorry, Dalton versus Hisu or Linkser versus Hisu. You're going to take Hisu every time. But anyway, in regards to Gibraltar, because last season when Beast and Logix were both playing for Toronto, and especially in games versus the Titans, those games were a lot closer. So it kind of doesn't surprise me that Titans took that map off of Toronto. I was happy that they got some playtime. I thought Beast actually looked better than last year. He looked a lot more aggressive, a lot more confident. I still didn't love some of his Primal Rage engages, but for the most part, he looked pretty good. Logix looked okay on the Tracer on Gibraltar, but I would have liked to have seen him pop off more. He just kind of I didn't notice him that much. And when you're on DPS and when you're on Tracer, you want to notice your Tracer doing something in a positive way, not a negative way. And then if you don't see them at all, that can still be a bit concerning because of the role Tracer plays. But anyway, yeah, Toronto lost that map, moved on to Hanamura, and they won that pretty easily. So versus the Atlanta Reign, Toronto did look a lot stronger. Uh, they seem to have gotten a few more of their kinks worked out. They seem quite a little bit more synergized after being in that first map or in that first match and getting things worked out. But Atlanta still did manage to take the first two maps off of Toronto. And going into this matchup, there was the general sense that I got from talking with my friends and looking at the game was that this was going to be a close game. Even the desk said it was going to be a close game, even though they all voted for fucking Atlanta. Yeah, the first map, Nepal, definitely was more conducive to a rush style, which benefits Rain because Rain has been together for so long. The core of Rain is Gator, Hawk, Masa, and Iris right now, who have all been on the team together for at least a year. And Rush is very much a style of being in sync. Usually when you get picked off in Rush, it's either micro positioning or just straight up bad positioning. Because Rush, it's played like goats. You group up, you fucking push in, and you murk the bastards. The Sato versus Gator matchup for the first map on Nepal was pretty evident that Gator is really comfortable on the Reinhardt. Sato not as much. I don't think Sato got completely shit stomped by Gator. I thought Sato had some pretty decent earth shatters. I just don't think the team was wholly ready to follow up in some of those cases. And again, it just comes down to synergy and knowing where your teammates are going to play. Obviously, the Reign had that, and Toronto didn't, which is why I think you saw Toronto lose the Rush matchup. And obviously, yes, Reign is the much better Rush team. They've got Masa, they've got Gator, Hawk is fucking solid. Yeah, I would just chalk it up to a lack of synergy. I think as Toronto plays more throughout the season, Toronto is going to get much better at the Rush and look a lot more smooth. They're not going to have as many hiccups because, especially going over to Blizzard World, which in my opinion is a little bit more conducive to double bubble, and that was even something that was slightly echoed on the broadcast. Because of all the high ground on second point, you've also got high ground on first point as well. Once you get to third point, Rush does become more viable there. But if you go back and you watch literally the first fight on Blizzard World, Lastro goes in for a 4-man nade and just gets flashed and murked by Kai on the Atlanta Reign. So bye first point. Toronto did manage to stabilize quite a bit on second, fairly decently on second point, but Lastro still got caught out quite a bit. And then it went to third point, and at that point, third point, Atlanta Reign on Rush. Rush being good on third point. Reign's gonna cap that all the way. Toronto then ran out on the Rush themselves on Blizzard World attack, and their first point attack was fine, but they did unfortunately get spawn camped for 4 minutes by the Reign after capping that. Just further emphasizing that Reign is the better Rush team and Toronto is not, and Toronto was also less synergized. There was a highlight on the broadcast where Gator hit a 4-man shatter, and Sato basically comes charging in from behind Gator, misses the charge, and then the team gets fucking slammed and wiped. Toronto did have a decent chance to get out of spawn after they lost that first fight after capping first point. But what ended up happening was the Reign used Speed Boost to escape from both the window, the blizzard, and I think it was even the Deadeye from Hisu. So 3 ults that got 0 value as a result of Reign just speeding out and going back up to the high ground. And then Toronto never really challenged that afterwards and weren't really able to get anything going. And again, that's why they got spawn camped for borderline 4 minutes on second point. They did, however, manage to make it to third point and make it a little bit closer, but not by much. And then here is where Toronto pulled out the broom and started the reverse sweep on Dorado. They looked a lot better on Dorado. Their first point hold was really solid. They looked a lot more aggressive, a lot more confident. Sato going in on the Winston and getting some massive primal rages, getting a lot of value with those. Michelle Zarya has looked really solid. and I'm becoming a really big fan of Michelle. I've noticed Michelle in a good way multiple times. We're gonna get to the grav later, don't worry. But for the most part, I've really liked Michelle's Zarya, and I really like Michelle's Diva. His Sigma still doesn't look like it's the strongest, which is fine. Every player in the league has a weakest hero. It's just to what degree is that your weakest hero. But that's besides the point because, yeah, Toronto had a great first point hold. Rain ended up capping it, though. They were able to stall it out fairly decently on second. And then third point, Michelle came up with one really big grab and one really, really bad grab. It really looked like it was a panic ult. I think he was trying to get the grab on cart after Gator landed that massive slam on third point. Unfortunately, he whiffed and launched that up to the high ground, and it got nothing.
The bubble is down. Sato going to be mitigating a bit at a time.
Yeah, so Gator hits the slam, and then Michelle panic ults and needs grab onto high ground. But then Nice gets the pick on Kai. Pelican gets the pick on Hisu, but then the nano goes in onto Michelle. Michelle has some pretty decent charge, so Michelle starts melting. Lastro hits a big nade as well. So really what ended up happening here was Lastro ended up coming up big for Toronto on not just Dorado, but especially third point. Here, Lastro already carried. Because Michelle whiffs his grab, so Lastro gives him the nano, so he can start melting. And then by the looks, Lastro also landed a really solid bio nade, which allowed Nice to collect the pick on Gator. And then after that, no one else was really able to touch for the rain. And Toronto stopped Atlanta just short of capping third point. I did get a little nervous watching Toronto when they were attacking on second point because sometimes getting that last point on second can be really difficult, and the stall just seemed to be going on for a little while. But anyway, at the end of the day, Toronto was able to take Dorado away from the rain. Next came Anubis, and Anubis was definitely not a good start for Toronto again. Nice got picked at the start by Masa in basically a straight up 1v1. Masa rode right up the statue at choke, took out Nice, and then after that, Kai cleaned up the next 4 picks, and Rain heads into second point attack on Anubis with 5 or 6 minutes on the clock. That's fucking nuts. But after that, Hisu then made the swap to the Sombra, and it pretty much just seemed like Rain couldn't get anything going after that. They made zero attempt to deal with Hisu, and what that allowed him to do was to farm up EMP very quickly, and that allowed Toronto to get their ult cycle going. If Rain had actually paid some attention to Hisu, I think Rain actually very well could have gotten second point on Anubis, but they paid zero attention to Hisu, allowed him to get a lot of value. Nice didn't look particularly good on the Echo. His neutral game was fine, but his ults were really questionable, and I really don't know why. He copied the Diva a bunch of times. He copied a Lucio on Dorado. His ult usage for Echo is going to need some work, but that's definitely something I think KDG can work out. But Rain were not able to cap a second point on Anubis as a result of Toronto getting their ult cycle going, and their just lack of willingness to actually try and deal with Hisu on the Sombra. Then Toronto switched to the attack, and it took them a moment or two to get first point, but they headed into second point attack with 3 to 4 minutes on the clock, if my memory is serving me correctly. And honestly, that first fight that Toronto took on second point, I thought they were going to win. Michelle got a nice solid 3-man grab on the back line. Sato went in on it. Unfortunately, we lost Sato. The stall ended up dragging out, and Toronto had to reset. But eventually, Toronto was able to get second point Anubis. Another note for Toronto's defense on Anubis is Hawk never actually got to use bomb, which I thought was really big and was really big for Toronto and really bad for Rain. Because the poor guy got staggered so much. He got staggered all the way back to fucking spawn. And it got to the point where he got staggered. In the last fight, he still hasn't used bomb on second point. I don't know if he even used bomb at all this game. But he ended up having to swap, otherwise he would have wasted too much time not in mech trying to get it back. I didn't think Hawk had the greatest map on Anubis versus Toronto. And then, lastly, for map 5 on Busan, me and Diamond were discussing this during the broadcast, and it was kind of a 50-50 we both felt initially going into it, because Mecha Base is really good for rush. So if Busan starts on Mecha Base, Atlanta plays rush and wins that section of Busan. Sorry, and then the next point that Diamond made was that Sanctuary on Busan was going to be Toronto's map to win or to lose, whatever you want to call it, because that one's more conducive to double bubble or a dive, and then it would really just come down to downtown Busan. However, we actually ended up starting on downtown Busan, which was really interesting to watch because Sato and Gator almost seemed to reverse what you would expect them to pick. Gator started out on the Winston with Hawk on the Diva, and then Toronto rolled out with Sato on the Ball and Michelle on the Zarya. So Toronto's comp had better poke because they were playing the Brig Zen, and Zen obviously has really good poke and really good damage, and he has Discord. Ball has much better poke than Monkey. Monkey, you're either in or you're out. You don't get to poke as Monkey, but you can poke as Ball. Michelle is also going to have better poke than Hawk, given just the range of Diva's primary fire and the damage fall off thereof. And then Hisu started on the and then Hisu matched Kai on the Ashe, and then Neist and Pelican both played the Tracer. So as a result of Toronto's comp being better on downtown Busan, and also a result of Rain not playing Edison, because if you look at the two maps that were played on Busan for Toronto to get this win, like Pelican was consistently on the Tracer. I don't think there was a point in time where Pelican ever flexed or swapped off to the Echo. So I think if Edison had been in, I think it could have been much closer, and that perhaps Rain could have taken that. But at the end of the day, they didn't. And as a result, Toronto was able to take downtown Busan. And then Sanctuary, Toronto swapped to the Ball Diva, and Rain matched. The only difference between the Toronto and Atlanta comps on Sanctuary was that Hisu was on the Ashe and Kai was on the Widow. Now, you can get value from the Widow if the Widow's hitting shots, but with the comp that Toronto was running, there really was no space for Kai on the Widow. And me personally, I would take the Ashe over the Widow to begin with, because Ashe is far easier to hit shots on, and Ashe has the far more impactful ultimate. Bob is way better than Widow sights. Don't get me wrong, Widow sights are important, but Bob puts out guaranteed damage. Bob can contest cart or contest point, whereas Widow sights just makes it a little bit easier for Widow to hit headshots. But again, if your Widow's not hitting shots, it doesn't fucking matter. Neist was able to come up with a big pulse bomb as well on Sanctuary, which really helped Toronto clean it up. Yeah, Sanctuary actually ended with the score of 100-99. So that was quite close, and I think that was actually about as even of a matchup as you could get on last point on Busan, because Gator's no slouch on the ball. And I honestly wasn't particularly happy with Sato's Ball, especially versus Vancouver. I thought he just kind of rolled around and did nothing. I don't think Michelle is, and obviously we know Michelle's kind of weakest off tank is the Sigma, especially compared to Hawk. I think Hawk has the better Sigma. To be successful in the Overwatch League, you have to be able to be very good at multiple comps in order to get wins on multiple maps. That's why the Shock have won the last 2 years in a row, because they're able to master multiple comps, which makes them very effective at multiple maps. So, to wrap this up, we'll go over with a couple notes for each player on the Defiant going forward. Well, we'll start off with major improvement for Toronto this year. Obviously, on paper, they do look much better, and that is in big part to they actually have an in-game leader. They have an actual shot caller to lead the team while they're playing, which is something that Toronto has not had since they came into the league. It's been something I screamed about in my old videos, and it's something I am finally happy that they have now. The post-game interview with Lastro said that it was Sato who was largely the in-game leader for them, making all of the calls and things like that. So I'm glad Toronto finally has someone like that actually in the server while they're playing. Sato, at the end of the day, just looks like Sato. He looks like the same Sato we saw on Philadelphia Fusion. I think Toronto fans should be very happy and very grateful that we have Sato. He is, in my opinion, still a top 3, top 4 main tank in the league. And an interesting stat from the broadcast, I'll pull it up here. For Sato's player resume is, yeah, we know he's a 2020 Summer Showdown and Countdown Cup finalist. But he's number one in team fight win rate as Reinhardt in 2020. So that was last year at 59.7%. And he also has the number one lowest team fight damage taken per 10 as Reinhardt as well. He also has the number one fewest team fight deaths as Reinhardt per 10. So his Reinhardt is no slouch, even though it is generally considered to be his weakest main tank. I don't think he's actually as bad as Philadelphia fans kind of made him out to be. He doesn't always pass the eye test, but I think analytically he passes kind of with flying colors. If you ever watched hockey or traditional sports, one thing that's come up, and I'm going to use hockey as an example here because I watch a lot of hockey and I'm a Canadian. What else would you expect me to watch? Is that you have the eye test and then you have the analytics. And then in the middle there you have stats. Stats just kind of back up the eye test a little bit. The eye test is just like, man, this player is like really fast. He has a really hard shot, right? You can tell these things by looking at them. And these things can be backed up by stats in the NHL like goals and assists. But then you have other players that really don't seem like they do anything, and they don't look fast, they don't have a particularly hard shot, they don't necessarily have a great pass, but they never seem to be caught out. They're always smart. They're in a defensive position. They do a really good job of shutting things down, and that's where analytics and more advanced stats come into play, which is kind of what we're looking at here with number one lowest team fight damage taken as Reinhardt in 2020. Same thing for fewest team fight deaths as Reinhardt in 2020. Right? Because the narrative for Sato coming out of Philly was that the reason he looked so good last year was because Alarm and Funny Astro healing the ever-living shit out of him. Based off these stats, at least on Reinhardt, they didn't have to. Right? He took the least damage as Reinhardt per 10 minutes than any other tank in the league. Now he might not frag the same way that Super does, or always hit the massive shatters that Super does, or Cloudy, or Fisher when Fisher was in the league. But this should dispel the narrative that the only reason he was good was because of the team he had around him. He is a very solid player, and that's reflected in these stats. He doesn't always pass the eye test. Sometimes I sit there scratching my head wondering, how did he die? Analytically, he's solid, and yeah, I just kind of wanted to point that out. Michel obviously looked good versus Vancouver. He got a lot of limbs, a lot of final blows. Overall, over the last two games has looked a little volatile, but more often than not, he's impressed me. Nice has been consistent. He hasn't wowed me. It's not like he's carried. He's shown up positively, but his Echo Ultimate usage needs some work. But I actually do have faith in this team to improve and get better as the season goes on, and to look strong because of the coaching of KDG. That's another thing that Toronto lacked for the last two seasons. Isu was a fucking god all weekend long, hitting mad shots, went toe-to-toe with Kai. He looked really solid, showed why he was put in over Carpe last season as well. Next we'll talk about Logix, since Logix is right now kind of the face of the franchise, given that he signed, I think it was a 3+1 or a 2+1 in the offseason, which is one of the longer contracts that you can sign in the league, meaning Toronto wants him around. They want him as the face of the organization. To a certain extent, who knows, maybe having Sato and Hisu here and having them play more might change that for Toronto. I hope not. I do like Logix. I would have liked to have seen him pop off more. The whole point of putting him and Beast in on Gibraltar was that it was just to close out the series to get them some playtime. I don't think they'll end up playing as much, which is kind of sad because Logix's Tracer is really good. I actually think it would be obviously better than Nice, I think, and I think he would also have the edge on Hisu on the Tracer as well. But given that the team is largely Korean, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to put him in, at least not until communication things are worked out. Ansoon J looked fine. He looked solid. He didn't disappoint by any means. He looked solid. He looked like about what you would expect a Lucio to be. I think there might be a little bit more to get from him. I pop off a little bit more, but more of the focus is going to be on Lastro, because Lastro fucking carried the game versus Rain. Especially on Blizzard World, he got caught out a lot. But from Dorado on out, Lastro was solid, hitting big nades, not getting caught out of position. If your team is built on the assumption that this player needs to play all the time and pop off all the time in order to win, then that means the rest of your team is not up to par and you need to find better pieces to support that. So I do not want to see Lastro in a position where he has to play like he did against the Reign every single map, every single game for the entire season, because that means Toronto is not a strong team. But if other players can step up, and I think other players can step up, we've seen Jesus step up, we've seen Sato lead the team, especially that was especially noticeable on Dorado, and Anubis as well, where Anubis, they went right to the fucking spawn at the end. Does this change where Toronto is in my power rankings? No. Generally speaking, I would place Toronto in. I would have placed Toronto in the 5th to 8th range for the preseason. I don't think that changes much here. Otherwise, let me know which team you're cheering for. If any of the games changed your opinion or where you think teams rank so far this season. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Click like if you like this video. Click subscribe if you want to see more of my stupid face. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.